We're really grateful that you guys are attending, and we're really hoping that you'll find this time to be very valuable and worth the sacrifice. Real quick, I just wanted to start. I think I might need you to move me forward, Kristen. There we go. So my name is Stacy Henry. I'm the chair of OPAGS, which is the graduate student portion of the Ohio Psychological Association. We put this on yearly, and our hope really is that students, regardless of what year you're at, can really learn to know what you don't know, or give you the opportunity to ask those questions that maybe your program doesn't really support an opportunity for you to ask. So that's really the hope today. Our agenda will be a brief overview of OPAGS for a few minutes, followed by a quick survey, which we will use. I'll explain a little bit more in a second, but we'll use that to inform the afternoon sessions, just to kind of make that process go a little bit easier. Our actual morning session will start about 10:15, where we will have a quick overview of the internship process. So trainees who have successfully gone through the process, they have put that together, and it really gives everybody an opportunity to see all of the aspects that really go into this process. After that, we will introduce our training directors, the ones who have been able to attend. They'll be open for question and answer. And the way we're going to do that is Kristen and Courtney will really host that, and they'll present the questions that you guys either submitted before all of this started, or questions you guys put in the chat. And really, this is an opportunity to ask the general questions to a bunch of different directors to get different various opinions. Between 12 and 12:30, we'll take a quick break, grab some lunch, and reset for the afternoon session. And this is really a time to meet in small group or one-on-one with various directors. Later we'll have a list of the directors who are attending, but just keep in mind that this directors can kind of come and go at various times. So we'll let you know later in the afternoon exactly who's available. And we can move ahead. So again, welcome. Thank you so much for taking this time. I know that everybody's really busy, and taking Saturdays are so precious, either for work time or family time, so thank you. My name is Stacy Henry, and I'm the chair of OPAGS. I wanted to take a minute to just note some of our board members who've done so much to help put this together. Kristen, Lexi, and Courtney, they're hosting a majority of this morning's event. And they'll be doing the PowerPoint presentation. Taylor is going to host the breakout rooms in the afternoon. Also, Carolyn, Elena, Brock, and myself, we really put a lot of work into just meeting with the training directors and advertising for this. So thank you very much for everything everybody's done. And a really big shout out to Karen, the OPA staff member who's helped us with all of this. So a lot of hard work's gone into it, and I wanted to make sure I said thank you. Quick overview on OPAGS in general. So just a quick few plugs for those of you who are not actively members, or maybe you are members, but you don't know all of the opportunities available for leadership opportunities. We will have at least 3, if not 4 board positions open this year. So if that's something you're interested in, please reach out to Brock, our chair-elect. He would absolutely love to give you more information. And it really can be as high demand as low demand as you're able to be, as you're able to do. So if that doesn't fit something that into your schedule, campus representatives are also a really great way to support OPAGS. And it's really just letting your programs know what's going on. So that's always welcome, and we're definitely in need of campus reps, and just becoming a student member and attending events. Obviously, we put this on for our student members, but it really helps us to have that support. So you can move on. Before we move on to the survey, I guess are there any questions? Does anybody have any questions, whether it's about how the day's going to go, or about OPAGS, or anything that they feel like they'd like to address now? Okay, if you do, I'll take a look at the chat and we can address those later. Let's move on to the survey. Okay, so you may have gotten an email about this earlier in the week, but we didn't get a lot of feedback, so we thought this was a good time to do it. Our breakout sessions in the afternoon you'll be able to come and go throughout the breakout rooms as you please to meet with whatever training directors you're interested in meeting with. However, when we first get there, we would like to set everybody up in a breakout room so that way everything kind of runs smoothly in that regard. So it looks like Karen has put the survey link in the chat. So I would like to ask everybody who plans on meeting with training directors, if they could please click that link and fill out the survey. This is not a guarantee that you want to meet with every single one of these. If you decide you want to meet with a different one that you didn't put on this survey, that's completely okay. I'm just using this information to inform where you'll go initially. So again, you might notice in the afternoon there might be a training director that wasn't on this list. This is really just to get a quick snapshot of where I can put everybody initially so we can kind of get a smooth start to the afternoon. Is anybody having any problems accessing the link or have any questions? It looks like we don't. So while everybody's taking a minute to fill that out, I just want to again reiterate that this is really an opportunity to figure out what you don't know, areas that you would like to know a little bit more detail, and really utilize this opportunity to ask all of those questions. No question is a stupid question. This is not any sort of, this is just really that time to take advantage of asking this question so we can start this internship season off with a bang. So with that, I think I will, while everybody's finishing that up, pass this over to Kristen, Lexi, and Courtney. Again, they're trainees who have been on the OPAGS board for quite a few years, and they have just successfully went through this process. So we thought who better to help us through that initial overview than them. So thank you guys very much. And I will pass it to you.
Thank you, Stacy. So as Stacy said, I'm Kristen and I'm presenting today with Lexi and Courtney, and we all just recently matched. So we wanted to take a little bit of time this morning just to present some little words of wisdom about how do you prepare for the internship applications. So just a quick overview of all of us. Like I said, I'm Kristen. I go to Wright State University and I matched at the Cincinnati VA on their health psychology track.
Hi everyone, good morning. My name is Lexi. I am currently at Case Western Reserve up in Cleveland, and I matched at Nationwide Children's on the child clinical track.
And hello everyone, I'm Courtney Young. I'm kind of a mix of Kristen and Lexi, so I go to Wright State similar to Kristen, and then similar to Lexi, I matched at Nationwide Children's Hospital in a different track, so I will be at the Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities track.
So our topics for today that we're going to try to hit all of these is just a general overview of APIC, APPI, and then the National Matching Service, as well as the application materials you'll need, what the interview process might look like, how to rank the sites, and then phase 2. So I'm going to pass it over to Lexi to get us started.
Okay, well, welcome everyone again. We are so happy to have everyone here. So this morning I am going to first be defining some of the important organizations and platforms that you will become well familiar with during the internship process. So we will first start today with APIC, which is the Association of Psychology, Postdoctoral, and Internship Centers. I also noted here that this will be one of several acronyms throughout the internship process that you will use on a daily basis and will become a part of your common vocabulary. So APIC is the organization that organizes and oversees the entire internship process, as well as some of the postdoc process as well, but we'll save that for another workshop. So I added a link to their website so you can really browse all of their information and their services, but they really house all of the information, the instructions, guides, and everything so on that you'll need to successfully apply to internship. They have a very lengthy resource section, and honestly, we could probably create our own presentation just on how to navigate the APIC website and how to really make use of their materials. But the one thing that I really wanted to highlight for us today is the APIC directory. So the APIC directory includes all of the accredited and non-accredited programs in the entire US as well as Canada, with information about programs, their requirements for applying, as well as their brochures, which house a lot of the detailed information about programs. So this is often really the first step of the internship process, is to sit down and browse through the APIC website, familiarize yourself with all of the resources and sort of the steps of then entering this directory to search for programs to start creating your list of sites that you plan to apply to. So as you can probably imagine, because it's containing all of the sites, it contains more than you could ever have time to browse through initially, especially a lot of sites that won't be a good fit for you or not of interest. So what APIC has done is they've created a really helpful filter system to help narrow down your searches. So you can filter by things like accreditation status, by setting, by patient population, and so on, really to eliminate sites that are not a good fit for you at all. So for example, I was looking for only APA accredited sites in a hospital-based setting that had tracks working with children and adolescents. So through this filtering process, I was able to eliminate VA sites or correctional facilities, which were just of not particular interest to me and would not be a good fit. But I would imagine that when Kristen, for example, filtered through her results, her list would look a lot different than mine. Obviously, she was interested in a VA or adult sites, and really is unique to every single applicant based on what your needs are. So after you have generated this list, which depending on how much you're filtering and narrowing down could range from 20, maybe even 100 sites, you'll be able to look through all of their information on their APIC page on the directory, which includes a link to their website, it includes a link to their brochure, and you can really start to whittle down your list and find what's a good fit for you. I would like to mention that you can start doing this as soon as possible, but the sites will likely update their information for this upcoming application cycle around July. So if you were to look sooner, you would be seeing information from the 2020-2021 cycle, which may be a bit outdated. So the last thing that I would like to mention about APIC is the email listserv. So by emailing the link that I provided here or following the link on the APIC website will actually add you to the listserv. And the listserv includes a lot of important updates throughout the application process, like sites that are added or dropped to the match, changes in tracks or rotations or stipend for a site, changes in hour requirements, which was a big one last year, given sort of the effect of COVID on hours, and more towards the end of the application cycle, match updates. So I highly encourage everyone to get on the listserv if you're planning on applying, because it'll give you some important updates. Thanks, Kristen. So the next acronym looks a little bit similar to APIC, but now we're going to talk about the API, which is the APIC application for a psychology internship. So the API is your application for internship, as its name implies, and it's also the applicant portal or the web page that you use to fill out and submit your applications. So I included the link, the web link here for the API for you to follow along. And another early step that you can accomplish and cross off your list is to create your API account. It's free to do, and you can get started on that. The one thing though with that is you do have to wait until the system opens up for the cycle, which I believe tends to be around mid-July, so not quite ready yet. So once you've created your appy, you will see that the interface is incredibly user-friendly for adding programs that you plan to apply to after you've created your list. You'll go ahead and select them and kind of make a nice list on the side of your page there of where you're going to apply to. For adding all of your relevant materials that we'll talk about in just a bit in the presentation. Linking your clinical hours to your application, which we will talk about in just a second, and requesting your letters of recommendation. So I found it to be a very straightforward and organized system to navigate. Really no hiccups with working the appy, and I found it pretty easy to use. So as I mentioned, there's also a seamless option to link your time to track hours to your application directly. So if you have not been previously using time to track, it will ask you to fill out a form to provide your clinical experiences. If you have been using time to track, it's really just a button that kind of syncs your hours with your application. And I'll take this time just to plug time to track if you haven't been using it, because I would imagine doing the form would take extra time as opposed to just syncing all the hard work that you've been doing, logging hours, but I can't speak to that personally. As part of your application, your DCT has to also approve and sign off on your hours, which the appy also makes very clear after you've synced your hours with your application, and it'll ask you for the option to send it off to your DCT. Once they verify it, it does lock in your hours. But again, it's a really simple process, and the appy makes it pretty straightforward to navigate. And then lastly, just jumping ahead a little bit, once your application materials are finalized, the system is very straightforward on submitting and paying for each individual program application. So not too much to say in terms of the appy. Like I said, it's very easy, I found, to use. Just wanted to kind of hit some of the highlights of some of the important things to keep in mind as you're going through the process, like syncing your hours, getting your DCT to sign off on them, and so on. And so the last acronym that I at least have for you today is the NMS, or the National Matching Service. So if you're unfamiliar with the internship process, it follows a ranking and matching system that is similar to that of a medical residency. And I believe that the medical field also uses the NMS. So it follows that same guidelines of ranking and matching. So once your DCT approves your request to apply for internship, early on in the application cycle, you can register for the match using the link provided here, or following it from the APIC website, or Googling it, or however you want to get there. But it does cost a $130 fee, and I believe we do have a list of all the fees up right so you can see it all, but that is kind of the first fee you tend to encounter, is at $130. After you register for the match, you will receive your match ID, and that links your application materials to you, to the sites that you're applying to, and the matching system. So it's kind of that code that, you know, puts everything all together and links all the puzzle pieces. So when you're entering your match ID, especially when you're on your appy where it asks you, to enter and to link all of your materials to you, please triple check that you have entered the right ID, especially again on that application, to link all of your materials to you. I would imagine if you were to incorrectly enter that, you could, get into a sticky situation that I'm sure could be resolved, but you want to eliminate all potential areas for stress as much as possible. So please triple check that. You'll probably have it memorized towards the end as you've been repeatedly entering at places. So hopefully it sticks in your brain. But after registering and getting that match ID, you really don't spend too much time with the NMS until it becomes time to rank, which I'll talk about in a few slides at the your application process. And the last thing with the NMS that I have to say is that you can register again for the match once you've been approved by your DCT to register. But APIC does suggest that you try to register before December 1st. You can do it after, up until I believe early February, right before the ranks are solidified on both ends. But after December 31st, I think you do need to go through some extra steps that involve your DCT. And again, we're all about trying to eliminate any extra steps, any extra stress. So if you can, try to register by December 1st.
So as Lexi mentioned, here's just a brief overview of potential fees that you'll have in terms of applying for internship. So as she had mentioned, to register for the matching service, it's that $130 fee at the bottom. This is also non-refundable. And then for the first application you submit, it's $50. For applications number 2 to 15, it is $32. And then for any additional application above 15, it is $60. So if you were to apply to 15 sites, it would cost roughly $498. And we just wanted to sort of put this out there to make people aware, because I know I didn't actually know the true cost of the applications until I was about ready to submit, and then I realized how much it was going to cost. So if this is helpful for people to start, budgeting or saving, we just wanted to provide that information so that you all have it. So now I'm going to go into the application materials, so everything you'll need to submit your APPE application. So first is a cover letter. So for every site that you apply to, you will be writing a cover letter for that site. And essentially, this cover letter is your chance to identify why you're a good fit for the site and for the training. And you want to make sure that you're tailoring that to each site, so you can talk about your goals and how the training that they can provide will help you meet those goals that you have for internship. You also should be relatively concise, so 2 pages or less. And some of your training directors may provide some information specifically on how, they recommend writing cover letters. So definitely take in all that information if you've never written one before. It's also really important that you include your contact information, such as your name, your address, your email, potentially a phone number, just so that people have that. And then something I also did was put my match code that Lexi had talked about. I put that on all the cover letters as well, so that if for any reason they had multiple people with my name applying and they were like, who the heck is this Kristen George compared to the other, they had a match code that they could reference. The next is the curriculum vitae, or the CV. So this is an overview of your professional accomplishments and qualifications. So a lot of us have probably been working on this ever since we entered the program, our programs, or potentially even before we entered graduate school. So just update that, edit that if you haven't touched it for a while, and then you can use that to apply. So some things, if you've never made one, that are important to include are things like identifying information, your education experiences, any military experience, if that's relevant for you, any licenses you have, clinical training that you've received so far, any research experiences that you have, any teaching experiences, volunteer and community service, publications, presentations, any professional memberships, so like APA or OPA and OPAGS, any awards you've received, and then any special competencies. So for example, if you happen to be bilingual, you could put that on there. There's really no page limit for a CV. So just have at it and put all the information in there that you feel is relevant, and then you'll include that in your application. So the next big piece of the applications is the essays. So there are 4 essays that you are required to write for each site. And I will say I just essentially use the same essay for most of them. You can tailor some of them as appropriate, but that could create a lot of work, especially if you are applying to 15 sites. And the questions are essentially general enough that you won't need to write a different essay for each site. So these essays are an introduction to you as a professional and your opportunity to really present your best qualifications. So before I get into the essay prompts themselves and some tips for specific essays, some general tips is just to really brainstorm your ideas. Reflect on how you can really show each site your unique self. Try to be creative, be careful in what you're writing, and be professional in that autobiographical essay. Make sure you allow time for multiple drafts. So hopefully with getting some of this information today, you could start your brainstorming process tomorrow if you wanted. And just give yourself that time to start thinking about, what am I going to write for these essays, so that I have time to do multiple drafts, to proofread. Maybe my training director is willing to review my materials, or I have someone who's willing to review them, and you want to give yourself that time. So as I said, proofread and have someone review them if that's possible, and then set a deadline for yourself as well, so that you can just have them finished and you don't have to worry about them all the way up until the applications are due. So going into each essay, the first one is an autobiographical essay. So the prompt for this is just, please provide an autobiographical statement. There is no correct format for this question. Answer it as if someone had asked you, tell me about yourself. It is an opportunity for you to provide the site some information about yourself. So some general tips for that is to really state your goals for internship and for future career. Connect your history and your training and your education to your internship goals. This isn't just a restatement of your CV though, so you want to not just be listing things that they could pull up your CV and be like, okay, we got that information twice. Now you want to try to be a little bit more creative and highlight important experiences and how they've really shaped you as a professional. You can also talk about your future and the role that the internship site can play in that development. And then this really serves this essay as an orientation to your application. So it helps orient that reviewer to what they might see in the other application materials. And then just another tip is sometimes there is too much information that can be provided. This is really up to you to decide what may be too much information, but some disclosure is okay, but be mindful of how much information you're kind of disclosing there. The second essay is the theoretical orientation essay. So this prompt is, please describe your theoretical orientation and how this influences your approach to case conceptualization and intervention. You may use de-identified case material to illustrate your points if you choose. So this essay, you really want to focus on your personal opinions, beliefs, and practices related to your clinical approach to working with clients. It can be helpful to bridge your current and future theoretical framework together. And then again, with the potential to use de-identified case material, you can talk about how you approach cases, both therapy and assessment cases, because some people may apply to really assessment heavy or assessment only sites. And so it'd be important to discuss how your theoretical orientation informs how you approach assessment. And then you also want to just avoid providing straight definitions of theoretical orientations. So most, if not all of the people you are going to be submitting this to will know what CBT is, will know what psychodynamic is. They don't need that textbook definition. They really want to see how you take what that theoretical orientation is and you apply it to your work. Third essay is a diversity essay. So that prompt is, please describe your experience in training and work with diverse populations. Your discussions should display explicitly the manner in which multicultural and diversity issues influence your clinical practice and case conceptualization. So for this essay, it's a great opportunity to really articulate your views, beliefs, and approaches to issues of diversity. You can identify meaningful experiences and training. Again, you could use a specific de-identified case if applicable. It's also helpful to use this to connect to your goals if your goals and diversity sort of interconnect. And then a last tip is just to consider, how do you apply your diversity training and experience to your clinical work? So if you have received diversity training through your program, through different webinars or different organizations you're a part of, how can you take what you've learned there and apply that to your work with clients? And then the last essay is a research experience and interests essay. So it's a very straightforward prompt of, please describe your research experiences and interests. So for this one, there's really no limit to what you can talk about. It doesn't have to be, this is the research I've been doing the past 3, 4, however many years. You can talk about that. You can talk about how you use research in your clinical work. Definitely want to talk about the interests that you have in potential research training, especially if the site you're applying to is one that is more research-based or research-heavy. It can be helpful to talk about your thesis or dissertation, especially including results and clinical applications of that dissertation or thesis, if that is applicable at the time of your application. And then also, again, as is the theme with the rest of these essays, you really want to tie back this essay to your goals for internship as well. So all of these essay prompts can be found on the APPE applicant help center page. So if you look that up or go to the help center page on the APPE website, under program materials, there's a section about essays, and it'll have all of those prompts for you there. So the other piece of the application is the letters of recommendation. So all of your references that you ask must use a standardized form created by APIC. So we'll have a picture of that on the next slide. You can access that standardized form through APIC's website. if you go to internships or application, there's a section, and then you do overview of internship applications, and there's a section with that form. It's important that you ask people who can speak really to your clinical skills. And also a lot of sites sometimes will maybe want someone who knows you from the academic side of things or through your research with your dissertation. So an advisor or a chair can be helpful for that as well. So it's important that once you ask these letter writers to write you something, that you provide them information that would be helpful in writing that. So a lot of times people may request a copy of your CV, the kinds of sites you're applying to, maybe areas that you want them to highlight. I also recommend if they don't specifically ask for that, it could be helpful still to provide them a copy of your CV and a general idea of the sites you're trying to apply to, just so that they can formulate the letter for that. This is also important that you set a clear deadline for them. A little tip and trick that some of my cohort members and myself did was tell our rec letter writers a week before the applications were actually due that their letter was due, just to make sure we had that buffer time and weren't scrambling last minute trying to get the letters of recommendation submitted. Most sites do request 3 letters, typically a faculty member who knows you well, and then 2 clinical supervisors. However, that number or the type of person they want to write the letter may change based off site. So it's really important that you read the program's materials closely and follow their requests and their requirements for that. So here's a picture of what the standardized reference form looks like, just for everyone to look at. So it's pretty easy for the person to fill out since it really outlines everything that they want. But make sure you use this. You don't want the person to write a letter how they would normally write a recommendation letter and then submit that and it's not the right form. So just make sure, it might help to have a copy of this and send it with your materials to them of, hey, use this form. But once you request it through APPI, they should get notification that this is the form they should be using. And then the last few things, some applications require work samples. Again, read their materials to see if they want either like an assessment example or a treatment case example. Make sure that all of this information is de-identified and fully sanitized following both APIC and HIPAA guidelines. APIC lists kind of what that looks like for them so that you can make sure that all of that information is sanitized. It'd be helpful to provide samples relevant to that site and also ones that demonstrate your competence. So if you are applying to child sites and you have an assessment from your first year of practicum that was with adults, probably not the most relevant, and I would recommend trying to find an assessment that is specifically with children, because that can then highlight, I've done assessment with children and here it's something that I'm competent in. And then something Lexi had talked about was submitting hours on the APPI. So again, it's very seamless if you use time to track. You just click a button and it pulls all of that information over. And like she had said, if you don't use time to track, you have to fill out a different form where whatever method you use to track your hours, you'll just type in like, these are the amount of hours that I had for this item, this and this, which can definitely take a little bit more time. And then APPI also has an instructional video for both existing users of time to track and new users to time to track that will really help you understand, how do I pull these hours over, or if you don't have an account, how do I enter all of these hours? And I'm going to pass it off to Courtney to talk about the interview process.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So most applications are due November 1st, or kind of those first few weeks of November. So those couple of weeks are a little anxiety provoking while you're waiting to start hearing from sites that are reaching out to offer you interviews. But most sites are going to start reaching out in late November throughout the month of December. A lot of the sites are going to be sending emails with interview offers, but I did receive phone calls from I think 2 or 3 of my sites. So just be prepared that if you're getting phone calls from random numbers that might have the same area code from sites that you applied to, you might want to be a little bit more likely to answer those calls than you would in the past. It's likely that they're not spam calls that you're typically receiving, but it might be a site reaching out to offer you an interview. And you want to answer those because they're reaching out to all of the applicants that they're offering interviews to, which means that those slots for interview dates or specific times are going to fill up pretty quickly. So you want to make sure that you're responding as quickly and promptly as possible. Now, obviously, don't respond if you're in the middle of clinic and you get an email from a site. You can kind of wait until clinic is over, but you don't want to be waiting days to respond to those interview offers if possible, because one, that communicates to the site your level of interest in them. And then two, it also makes it more difficult with scheduling if all of the interview dates and times except for one has been taken by the time you respond. And then you really are left with making a decision whether you take that offer for the time and spot, or if you have to unfortunately not interview at that site if you have an interview on that other date. Obviously, in all of your emails or phone calls, make sure you're being professional and courteous. So I've heard some horror stories where individuals are talking to a receptionist or a secretary who's reaching out on behalf of the site, and interview applicants have not been very kind to those individuals. And just make sure we treat everybody professionally and courteously, because all of that stuff is going to get back to the supervising psychologist or the other individuals who are helping make those decisions for rankings. I also wanted to point out most sites start reaching out in late November to December, but do not panic if other people start getting interview offers before you. So one of my roommates applied to a lot of federal medical centers and prisons, and they reach out much sooner because there's a very lengthy process for background checks and all these things. I don't really know because I didn't apply there. But don't panic if people who applied to different types of sites are starting to hear for interview offers before you. It might just be that that's how their process works, that it's a little bit accelerated. You also want to be proactive in planning for how you're going to organize yourself, because when you start getting interview offers, a lot of them are going to come in the same week or same 2 weeks. And so your schedule is going to fill up pretty quickly. And so you want to be able to think through how you're going to organize yourself to make sure that if a site emails you or calls you, you have a very quick and easy way to recognize what days and times that you have available for interview offers, so that you're able to get back to that site as quickly as possible and be able to secure an interview spot with them. So what I did was I had a calendar up in my room with all of the possible interview dates for all of the sites that I applied to. So something that you'll notice when you're applying to sites is some sites offer 4 or 5 interview dates, which is great because that gives you more flexibility. But I did have a few sites that listed on APIC that they were only going to be offering 1 or 2 interview dates. And so that's something for you to consider when you're trying to schedule, is that those sites that only offer 1 or 2 dates, you might want to try and reserve if possible, so that you don't get stuck in a position where you're offered an interview at 2 sites on the same day. And if sites aren't able to kind of accommodate a different date, you might have to make a difficult decision as to which site you want to interview that at. And we want to minimize that as much as possible. Something else that's really important is talking with your practicum supervisors about what flexibility there will be for you in December and January with taking off for practicum. So I think the goal is always to take off the least amount of time as possible. But if you're at a practicum that's maybe 3 days a week, it can get really difficult throughout that month of January, depending on how many interviews you have. And you might need to take a couple days off of practicum. So have that conversation with your supervisor early, see what kind of flexibility there is. In my experience, this is not the first or last time that they've had this happen where their practicum student is applying for internship. And I've heard that most sites are really accommodating with letting you take off. But you don't want to make that assumption that they're going to let you take off and then training is scheduled or something really important is scheduled on a day that you've decided to schedule an interview, and then you're in a difficult situation again. So just being proactive with having that conversation and recognizing that there may be scheduling conflicts. So some sites do offer interview dates in December, and I know it can be very anxiety provoking scheduling those interviews and thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be a lot. This is going to be really different. I would highly recommend taking any interview dates in December if they're offered, because that really opens up your schedule in January. So I think I did 3 or 4 of my interviews in December, which I was mad at myself when I scheduled them initially, because that meant I had a couple interviews in December. But that's really helpful then for you to have more flexibility in January. Even if that just means in January, you have a few more days to just recover after interviews, reset yourself, prepare for that next site. Maybe just watch Netflix or walk your dog or something. So just be mindful of kind of what you think will work for you. For some people, it might work doing back-to-back interviews. And if that's you, that's great. But if you want a little bit more time for recovery and self-care, taking those interview dates in December would be pretty advantageous for you. And then be flexible. So we have to be flexible. Sites are being really flexible with scheduling for us. So just recognize that everybody's doing the best that they can with offering the dates and times that work for everybody involved in that interviewing process. And if you do have a scheduling conflict, reach out to the site and be as proactive as possible and recognize that they are likely going to do everything in their power to accommodate you and to make it work. But if not, just kind of don't let that discourage you and recognize that this is just what happens throughout the process, and don't let it stress you out or get you down. Which leads me to my last point on this slide, and that is that you will get rejections. And I heard this spiel last year and I was like, yeah, whatever. But it is so true. You're going to get rejections for a number of reasons, and it can be really discouraging, but I want to encourage you not to let it discourage you, because it might just be that the site's not a good fit for you. And maybe there's something about the site that you didn't recognize or wasn't available on the brochure that means that that site's not a great fit for your training goals. And so they're not offering you an interview because they know they couldn't meet your needs. Or maybe it's that you aren't a good fit for the site, and that's okay. We're not all fits for all of the sites, and you'll still get interviews at a lot of different sites that are a really great fit for your training needs and are going to help prepare you for postdoc, licensure, and early career. Next slide, Kristen. So Kristen, Lexi, and myself did not have to travel for interviews this year due to COVID. All of our interviews, I believe all of them, were virtual, and we're not quite sure what that's going to look like for your cycle of applications. But there are a couple of things to consider if you will be traveling for interviews that we were able to glean from other individuals we talked to who did this process a few years ago in a pre-COVID world. So the first thing is really to consider the timing involved with traveling for internship interviews. So if you are applying across the country, it's likely that you're going to be spending a lot of time in airports and hotels. And just think about what works for you in terms of how long you think it will take for you to recover after an interview. If you're traveling from East Coast to West Coast back to East Coast, what that jet lag might look for you, and how long it'll take for you to recover. And then also how long it will take for you to prepare for interviews. So likely you'll be preparing on plane rides or in the hotel room the night before your interview, and just recognize it's part of the process and it might be really stressful, but it's only a month or a month and a half, and you'll be able to get through it, and lean on your cohort mates and family and friends for support. Also expect problems, which I know sounds like the bearer of bad news. But we all know, being in Ohio, that December and January is probably not the best time for internship interviews to happen, just based on the weather that we know we get. It's very unpredictable with snow and ice and things like that. So it's very likely that you could have some difficulties if you're driving to an interview where you get stuck in traffic or there's a wreck, or there might be difficulties with flight delays or your luggage gets lost, things like that. Try your best to keep a positive attitude, reframe, stay focused, make sure you're proactively communicating with the site. Similarly to being able to communicate with that site, are you all getting feedback from me? Oh, there we go. You are not the first or the last person that this site has heard from that they have gotten stuck on a flight delay or something has happened. So make sure you're just proactively communicating. That, I think, will speak a lot to who you are as a person and some of those characteristics they might be looking for in an interviewee or an applicant. So making sure you're communicating with them. And if you are still able to get to that interview, maybe a little bit late, if the site's okay with that, just kind of taking a few deep breaths before you walk in, refocusing. I think that would speak very highly of you and your ability to adapt to change and unprecedented situations, which can also happen on internship. Thinking about some resources that you might have. So I know some specific credit cards give you extra points for flight miles and things like that. Looking for deals for flights online, because as Kristen noted, this process can be pretty expensive. So just being proactive and thinking about ways to save money if you can. And then also trying to schedule interviews in the same geographical area during the same week if possible. So my current practicum supervisor interviewed at 2 sites in Colorado, and she was able to make it so that she interviewed at both of those sites during the same week so that she didn't have to fly from Ohio to Colorado, back to Ohio, and then back to Colorado. So just something else to think through when you're scheduling is being as effective as possible, both with your time and with your money with flights. And trying to take care of yourself. I know that it's probably going to be difficult throughout this process, but making sure you're taking care of yourself so that you can present the best version of yourself during interviews. So in terms of internship interview preparation, you want to make sure you're doing your homework on the site. And a lot of this work is going to go when you're doing that application process, when you're writing your cover letters, when you're searching to find if that site's a good fit. But before your interview, you really want to reread that brochure, look at their website, their APEG page to make sure you have a good understanding of that site and the training opportunities that will be afforded to you if you match there. I would also recommend looking up the site supervisors. Oftentimes you will get a list of the supervisors you'll be interviewing with. So I looked up them, their research interests, what tracks that they were leads on in case I had specific questions for them about that track. That person would be a great person to ask those questions. And so you want to know what tracks that they work on, if they would be your supervisor, so that you can tailor your questions more specifically to that individual that you are interviewing with. And then also just looking up the geographic location of the site and the populations that they serve so that you have a good understanding if they're in a more urban area versus a more rural area and how that might kind of impact questions that you could ask the site or the types of patients that they serve. You always want to make sure you have questions prepared to ask the site. Oftentimes during interviews, you'll get multiple opportunities to ask questions, and you don't want to be in a situation where you don't have questions to ask the site. So I would recommend having a general list of questions that maybe you'll ask all sites about supervision or how cases are assigned or things like that. And then also having site-specific questions about training opportunities that are there, different rotations that you could do, opportunities for umbrella supervision, things that are more specific to that site based on the information in their brochure that you might want to know more about. So you want to make sure in order to do that, that you're reviewing specifics about the site. Because especially if you're applying to a lot of similar sites. So for myself, I applied to a lot of academic medical centers, children's hospitals, which means that oftentimes they had the same or similar tracks and rotations. And so you want to make sure you're not getting sites confused, because you don't want to ask a question about the feeding rotation that a site has. And then they're like, oh no, we don't have a feeding rotation. And you're thinking of a different site. So just making sure that you're reviewing those site specifics and making yourself a list that can help guide your questions to make sure that you're not confusing sites. Next slide. So some common questions that you might get asked during the interview process is kind of an elevator speech or that tell me about yourself question. So I actually found this question really difficult to answer because I had never really thought about it until someone told me I needed to think of an elevator speech. So just take a second and put a little bit of thought into kind of what you would say if somebody said, tell me about yourself, being able to talk about your professional and personal interests, kind of what brought you to psychology, things like that. And then some specific types of questions that a lot of us get asked on interviews are about an ethical issue that we encountered on practicum, the ethical principles that were involved, how we went about that situation and how it was resolved. And then also what you would have done differently if you could go back to that situation again. You might also get asked for assessment and treatment case examples, asked about your theoretical orientation. So I would definitely recommend rereading your theoretical orientation essay. And they might ask for specific assessment and treatment examples. So if you, in your theoretical orientation essay, give a case example about how you applied your theoretical orientation to a specific case, I would recommend talking about a different case during that interview because they've already read your essay and so they've heard that specific case example. And you want to be able to articulate to that interviewer that you have multiple examples of how you have effectively utilized whatever your theoretical orientation may be to both assessment and treatment cases. Some sites might give you case vignettes, either assessment or treatment, and then ask you a few follow-up questions about diagnostic considerations, your treatment approach, how you would define success in therapy. For assessment cases, it might be asking for you to read a case vignette and then talk through what you're thinking about in terms of an assessment battery. So just make sure that you're prepared for those. There's really not much of a way to prepare for case vignettes because you don't know what they're going to ask you, but just recognize it's really just thinking on your feet. They're not expecting a perfect answer of, oh, this is the assessment battery exactly, and that's exactly what they're thinking. They just want to hear your thought process to see that you have some of those solid clinical skills to be able to think through what you would be doing. A lot of sites are going to ask about your goals for internship and early career, and you want to make sure that you are tailoring that to how that site's going to fit with those goals. So if your goal for internship is to learn PCIT working with patients and families, and you're interviewing an adult site, that might not be a good match. So just think about how that site really aligns with your goals for internship and early career, and how they can help you meet those goals. You'll get asked questions about supervision, so good and bad experiences that you've had throughout supervision. They might also ask you about what sort of supervision you feel you benefit from, or what sort of supervision you're looking for on internship. So make sure that you're thinking through that. You'll get asked your personal and professional strengths and weaknesses. And you'll also get asked about your research interests, and more importantly, your dissertation in terms of what your dissertation is about and the status. So if you have results that you're able to speak to, that would be great. If not, that's totally fine. Just being able to speak to kind of where you are in that process and where you anticipate that you'll be on internship with your dissertation. And then finally, just general internship or general interest questions. So who you are outside of work, what you do for self-care, what you do when you're not engrossed in the world of psychology. Next slide, Kristen. And then thinking about kind of professional attire, it's relatively similar to likely what you've worn for practicum interviews or your interview to get into whatever graduate program you're in right now. So if you're wearing a suit, it needs to be a two-piece suit. You want it to match. Make sure you're considering the fit. We don't want it to be too tight, but we also don't want it to be very, very loose. We want to wear conservative colors. This might not be the time to wear your hot pink suit that maybe you wore to prom. We want it to try and be kind of darker colors, black, navy, gray. We want to make sure it's clean and well polished. For women, think about wearing a minimal heel, especially if you're going somewhere where you might be walking a lot, because a lot of interviews have tours. You don't want to be in your 6-inch stiletto heels, walking a mile through a hospital or through a prison. So you want to think about comfort as well. Minimal jewelry, and making sure facial hair, and then also for women, your longer hair is groomed and you look nice and neat. Next slide.
All right, so you've made it through your essays and your cover letters and your interviews. Now you're in the home stretch. So my first piece of advice, the first step with rankings, is to take a big, long, deep breath for 2 reasons. First, the match results have been more encouraging over the years. You can review the match statistics that I have in the link here to learn more. I didn't want to go too deep into the statistical details, but it is improving for applicants, which is a good sign. And then secondly, really to trust the process. This is a really big decision. I thought ranking was one of the harder parts to, again, have to make some solidified decisions and potentially decide, where you're going, and your fate is in your hands. But you will end up where you should be. That is something that I heard time and time again from supervisors, from faculty members, from other fellow students. And now, we're passing this advice on to you. The process works the way that it should, and you will be where you should be. And so that hopefully will take a little bit of the pressure off of you. So when you are in the process of ranking, you're going to head back to the NMS website, which has a very easy system to literally rank your sites. So you will see them visually ranked from 1 to your very last site. And I am here to say that, yes, the one at the top is number 1. At this stage in the process, you might be at the place where you need to confirm with someone that number 1 does in fact mean number 1 and not the inverse, where your last ranked site is up at the top. That's okay. You can remember me now saying that it is, unless they change it. That's how the process works. With number 1 is up at the top. So when you're ranking, it's very important that you rank only the sites that you would consider matching to. You do not have to rank all of the sites that you interview at. And sometimes people would rather stay on an extra year in the program than possibly go somewhere and attend an internship that is not a good fit for them. And that is okay. Remember, you are doing what's best for you in this ranking process and really envisioning yourself spending a year or potentially more if you were to stay on for a postdoc at a site. The other important thing to keep in mind is that you should be ranking sites based on your interest, not on how you think they're rating you, not on how you think you did in your interview compared to a cohort mate or the people at your interview. The rankings should be your personal preference. So the algorithm takes everything else into account. So please keep it at your preference, your interest in the site, and disregard how you think you did or how you think sites liked you or whatnot. When it comes to ranking, everyone has their own system, so do what works for you. So I personally went with a well thought out gut decision. I was also informally ranking programs as I interviewed to compare them with one another just to keep track of them. As Kristen and Courtney had mentioned, you can have a lot of interviews and there's just a lot of information floating around. So I would take notes after interview again about some of the logistics, but also just about my personal preference and where I felt they were in terms of my interest and of my fit. And then at the end, I sort of sat down, thought long and hard about it, and ended up going with somewhat of a gut, decision based on the information I had. That being said, though, there were some people in my cohort who used a data system where they assigned weighted values. They went with what the numbers told them. I've seen color coding systems. Everyone does have a personal preference. There's probably a million ways to do it, and there isn't one right way. Just whatever you will need to do to feel confident when you're submitting your rank that it's the right decisions that you have made. After you hit submit, though, take a minute to celebrate because you accomplished a lot in the past year. It was a stressful road to get to the place of submitting your ranks, and you definitely deserve a reward and some time to take care of yourself. After that, then my piece of advice is to really find anything that you can do to stay busy until match day because you're going to want to keep yourself occupied while you're waiting for the results.
And then just to wrap up this presentation, we wanted to give you all a little bit of information about phase 2, which I know nobody likes to talk about. But if you don't match in phase 1, there is a phase 2. So we want to encourage you just first to allow yourself to feel upset. It's okay to be upset that you didn't match phase 1. And so there's no shame in feeling whatever feelings that you're feeling, whether that's sadness, frustration, a combination, another emotion. And don't panic. There are every year a lot of great sites that are in phase 2 that didn't fill all of their spots for a number of different reasons. So don't feel like because you didn't match in phase 1, that means that it's over for you. Kind of feel those emotions and then let yourself reset and recognize that there are a lot of great sites that could still meet your training goals in phase 2. The big piece is that the turnaround time is much quicker. So you have 6 days between when the match results for phase 1 are released and when applications are due for phase 2. So it's a much quicker turnaround, but really all you need to do is identify the sites that you're interested in and write cover letters. So you don't need to change your CV, any of your letters of rec, any of your essays, things like that are all in theory going to be able to stay the same. So you're just writing those cover letters for sites. And interviews typically occur over the phone or virtual. So that's how they occurred for everybody this year, but always in phase 2, you're not going to be needing to travel across the country for interviews. They're typically over the phone or virtual. After those interviews, you're going to submit your rankings. And the wait again is shorter. So between when you submit your rankings and receive a match email for phase 2, it's about a week as opposed to phase 1, which is 3 weeks that honestly felt like 3 years for all of us. And the other piece with phase 2 that's really nice financially is you do not need to pay to submit applications for phase 2. So the money that you submit for phase 1 covers all of your applications for phase 1 and phase 2. You don't have to pay that $50 for the first application and $32 for each after. And then on the next slide, I have a little snapshot of the timeline for phase 2. this year, so that you can sort of visualize what that looks like. But don't panic. There are a lot of great sites in phase 2. And if you all have any questions about anything that Kristen, Lexi, and myself covered, and it was a lot to get through in 45 minutes, so we'll have our own breakout room in the afternoon that you all can feel free to hop into after you meet with any of the training directors to ask any additional questions about anything that we covered or other things about the process that we didn't cover.
Thank you guys so much for going over that. That was a lot of information, but it was really good information that I think gives us all a jumping off point. So I guess I'm going to hand it back over to Courtney and Kristen, who are going to move into the question and answer phase of everything. So I will hand it to you, ladies. Thank you.
So Courtney and I are first going to just introduce the training directors. We will say the site they're from and their name, and then allow them to kind of briefly introduce themselves and their site. And then after we get to the last person, we will kind of just leave it open to all of you to ask questions. If you could send them to either Courtney and I privately in the chat or to everyone in the chat. Courtney and I will kind of monitor that and read it out loud so that we don't have to like worry about fighting with each other over who's going to talk. And we just think that will be one of the smoother and easier ways to kind of do that. So you can start sending questions right now if you'd like while we're introducing people. So first, from Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health, we have Dr. Christensen. If you'd like to introduce yourself and your site.
I think that you are muted.
Thank goodness that never happens with clients. All right, my name is, again, Colin Christensen. I'm the new internship director for Child and Adolescent Behavioral Health. CNA is a nonprofit, full-service trauma-informed mental health organization in Stark County, and we specialize in meeting the emotional behavioral needs of children, adolescents, and their families.
Great, thank you. Next, from Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center, we have Dr. Guilfoyle.
Thanks everyone for letting me participate today. I see some familiar faces. I'm Shanna Guilfoyle. I am the current clinical director of the Division of Behavioral Medicine and Clinical Psychology at Cincinnati Children's. And I'm past training director of what we call our O'Grady residency in pediatric psychology. That's our doctoral internship. Given some transition in roles, I've stepped down into the associate training director position. We really focus on interns getting specialization in chronic health conditions and comorbid behavioral health concerns. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And next we have from the Columbus VA, Dr. Ray.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'm Chris Ray, psychologist from the Columbus VA, one of the co-directors of training. And we're a VA site, obviously. We offer training in professional psychology. We focus on interprofessional team care. Interns participate in training sites, cross settings within our center. And our internship, we follow a practitioner scholar model focusing on training for interns for clinical practice, while also teaching them to be consumers of research. So that's our site in a nutshell.
Great, thank you, Dr. Ray. Next, from the Dayton VA, we have Dr. Rudzinka.
Good morning, everybody. I have been the training director at the Dayton VA since 2008, and I'm currently the chair of the VA Psychology Training Council for the VA. And so I'm really excited to talk with everybody about a range of topics today, including some things training directors have been buzzing about that I'd love to share. Our program, I would say, offers a similar range of rotations as other VAs. The mission of working with veterans certainly at its core think some of our strengths are a really strong emphasis in our program to engage in competency-based supervision, both as a training committee and also to train our trainees in that model, as well as really deploying a really evidence-based practitioner model. So glad to be here.
Great, thank you. And next from the Lewis Stokes Cleveland VA, we have Dr. Kumel. Oh, just muted yourself.
Yes, yes. Hi, everyone. I am Angela Kimmel. I am the brand new training director at the Lewis Stokes VA in Cleveland, Ohio. So we provide, obviously, internship is a year of generalist training, but something that's unique about our site is you match to a specialty track in clinical, neuropsych, geropsych, health psych, or rehab psych. So if you are interested in those areas, please come talk to me. And then I'm also the chair of the Psychology Service Diversity Committee, and interns serve on that committee every year. So if you're really interested in diversity committee, I'm happy to answer questions and talk about that.
Great, thank you. Next from Metro Health Medical Center, we have Dr. Nielsen.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for inviting us to participate. We always appreciate doing this every year. So Metro Health Medical Center is a general hospital in Cleveland, Ohio, that serves both adult and children. And so our internship actually started as a child and pediatric training program focused on integrated primary care. And then we've developed 4 training tracks. One focused in trauma and community health, working with children in foster care. We have our integrated primary care pediatric psychology focused track, and then a neurodevelopmental disability track that focuses on autism or neuropsych assessment. And then our newest track is an adult health psychology track that focuses on treating patients with opioid and substance use disorders in integrated primary care settings. So you actually get to learn alongside physicians who are doing medically assisted treatments for those patients. Trainees in the adult health track actually get to do other health psych kinds of rotations and our sleep medicine and bariatric surgery pre-eval rotations and things like that.
Great, thank you. Next from Mid-Ohio Psychological Services, we have Dr. Williams.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having us. I always enjoy coming, and it's really convenient that it's virtual. So my name is Dr. Tasha Williams. I am the training director at Mid-Ohio Psychological Services, and we are a nonprofit community mental health agency that's physically located in 5 counties across central Ohio, but we reach multiple counties across Ohio in general. We work with a variety of populations and presenting problems. So we see kids as young as 5 through older adults. And we have some specialized programming for individuals who are court mandated to treatment, specifically with individuals who have engaged in sexually harmful behavior. And so in general, interns at our site receive generalist training in health service psychology and get some specialized training as well when working with court mandated populations.
Great, thank you. And then Dr. Mackinac-Coons from Nationwide Children's Hospital was running a little bit late, but should be able to join at the latest this afternoon for the breakout sessions. And then we did have a few sites who, due to some family emergencies or personal commitments, were not able to be here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put their site name and email information in the chat, and they have all agreed that they'd be more than happy for you all to reach out and email them if you had specific questions about their site.
And while she's doing that, I just wanted to double check that we didn't miss any training directors, because I know Stacy said we had some last minute changes, obviously, with things. So we wanted to make sure we got everyone who is here as a training director. Looks like we did. Okay. So now we're gonna just open it up to questions. Again, if you could send them in the chat or to everyone or just to me and Courtney individually, and we will sort of monitor that and read those questions out. So I have a question already that I'll just open up to the training directors. This one says, I'm curious if any of the programs represented here today have consultation opportunities for the interns.
I can chime in. So at the Dayton VA, we have a number of different rotations. One of them is our primary care mental health integration rotation, which collaborates with our consultation liaison team. So we actually have psychologists and actually an interdisciplinary team that work across settings on the medical units and the emergency department, things of that nature. So in addition to what I would consider regular consultation opportunities, embedded within every rotation, working in a collaborative medical center environment, there's a specific CNL component that folks can get some experience in if that's an interest area.
Hi, this is Shanna Guilfoyle. I can speak from the pediatric realm. At Cincinnati Children's, we're highly embedded into interdisciplinary medical teams. We have rotations within the consultation liaison medical service, but then also within sleep, pain, and GI services, epilepsy clinics, headaches clinic. So we have multiple, I think we have a nice balance of consultation, but also outpatient services.
In a similar fashion to child and adolescent, we offer a school rotation, and part of the nice thing about working with schools is you get the opportunity to consult with other school professionals and really provide a mental health perspective on how to help the kids.
Very similar to what Dr. Christensen was just saying, at Mid-Ohio Psychological Services, it is really common that all of our interns consult with teachers, other professionals within school settings, as well as caseworkers, probation officers, parole officers, things like that. So that is part of a majority of the cases that they would be working with.
Yeah, here at the Columbus VA, we have it's called PCMHI, so primary care mental health integration, where there's a lot of consultation opportunities, and then we also have what are called BHIP teams, where the interns get a chance to interact with a number of different professionals in that capacity.
Great. Thank you all for your answers. The next question we have is, do you all have any idea if most interviews next year will be in person or online? And then if you have any recommendations on how to prepare best between the two types of interviews.
So I'd love to speak to this from a VA perspective, because this is one of the things we've been talking about a lot and trying to figure out what this is going to look like. And so I suspect you're going to find a whole lot more programs sticking with a virtual model as we realize the credibility of doing it and frankly, the cost and just the savings to you all. I think there's a lot of concern about what we can and should be doing. And so one of the things that we are interested in, and there have been a number of different surveys going out, our trainees seem to want to come to our site. We would love to have you. I feel like many of our programs feel like you lose the opportunity to get to really know us in an informal way. It's almost that time walking between one room to the interview room where you can chit chat and just kind of get some of the vibe, the energy of the site. Plus seeing us, I think, interact with each other informally can be lovely. We always have a good time at interviews. So I feel like we lost that with virtual interviews. So a lot of us are thinking about offering optional like open houses, but then the question becomes, do the applicants feel obligated to come, or as if that is going to impact their ratings? We've even talked about, do we do an open house? Like, there's no good way to do an open house after the ratings, because you would want to meet us before you did the rankings. So just a real interesting challenge. I would love if people have comments in the chat. I think we're trying to figure out the right balance. And my perspective of all the training directors I've spoken with is we want to do what's best for our programs, but we really also want to do what's best for you. And so there's going to be, I think, a lot of figuring that out. The thing I would ask is, if a site tells you that they are offering an open house so you can meet us and that your participation isn't going to impact your ranking, is please believe us. I don't know how else to say that. I think it's going to be tricky this year. There'll be a lot of reinventing, I think.
I agree. And I've been at several meetings with other training directors in Ohio and outside of Ohio lately. And everybody, again, is having that same discussion. And I think we realized that if we were moving somewhere, we would want to see the city that we were going to. We would want to see the vibe. We would want to see what the people are like interacting in the hospital and that sort of thing. So we realized that there is a value to coming to see the program as well as for a trainee. But we actually found that the virtual interviews worked well. So I think we're probably going to do some form of a hybrid.
Yeah, at the Columbus VA, we used to do phone interviews, and then we moved to video interviews. We found that those work pretty well. We do have these optional open houses that were discussed, and we find that those work well for the folks who want to come to the site and want to see what it's all about and just kind of get a feel for, what things are like there. And we do emphasize, just like what was said before, that your performance, you're not ranked or anything based on your how you come across at the open house. That's not part of our ranking system. So.
At Child and Adolescent, historically, we always did in person, but over the past year, we did the Zoom interviews, and it seemed to work really well. Thinking back to when I was in graduate school, I was a pauper, and so the opportunity to do Zoom interviews, I think, would be appealing to a number of graduate students. And so that's certainly an option we want to offer. But at the same time, we respect that, if you're going to travel across the country, it might be beneficial to visit us in person. And so I would appreciate, and I'm sure a number of directors would also appreciate, would you prefer Zoom, in person, or an option to do both? Again, with the understanding there's no pressure either way, but we want to offer options to what works best for you.
So I agree with a lot of what the other training directors had said. And, coming from a site like Cleveland, we really thrive. We really benefited from bringing people in to see our city and our hospital and got so much positive feedback. But there's so many benefits to doing it virtually too. So we haven't made a final decision and are considering a lot of the factors that other people have mentioned.
I would agree. I don't have anything. So sorry. Go ahead, Shannon.
I was just going to say, I think we struggled this year that people don't know about Cincinnati. They think we're like cornfields and we don't have a city and we don't have skyscrapers. And I think we really lost the appeal of being able to see the city, go to dinner, and stay in a hotel in kind of an urban area. So that was one of the downfalls, although virtual interviews worked fabulous for kind of practicality wise. I hate that people can't actually see our city.
Mm-hmm. I think I found that we matched with people who had some connection to Cleveland already. So I think there's a lot of people who focus where they rank geographically. And so that was actually a benefit for us in that regard.
That was similar for us as well. And while I don't have many unique things to say, because we have not made a final decision about whether or not we're going to do virtual interviews or in-person interviews, I just looked at the APIC recent stats that said, I think about 70% of individuals polled preferred the virtual interviews. And so we will likely go in that direction, but I'm definitely very mindful of having equitable opportunities for all applicants. And whatever we offer, we want to offer the same exact thing for everybody to make it fair. So we're definitely monitoring what folks want. And I can just say, I agree. If anybody has any specific thoughts on that, I'd love to hear more from the applicants.
Great, thank you. I think that was a great question since it's evolving a lot. And kind of off of that sort of similar realm, Someone asked a question about how sites are handling differences in hours due to COVID disruptions to training.
I can start and just say that I know we are looking at hours in a very flexible way compared to maybe how we would have in other times where COVID wasn't impacting practicum experiences. So for both our assessment hours as well as therapy hours or intervention hours, we are very flexible as far as what we are looking for.
I'm going to say same. I'd be looking for experiences. What are the ways that you've made sure you get the experiences or developing the core competencies, have good foundational competencies? I think it's going to be way more relevant than have you hit a certain number of hours. I know that one of the concerns we have at our site, we've added a lot of assessment training because people have had less assessment. That's something we've continued to do even through COVID. I think that's a way that people could really strengthen their applications, any way that you can get some additional assessment. Maybe it's not the same as what you would have done pre-COVID, and we understand that, but being creative, how do you get more data? Maybe it's more collateral information. Maybe it's how you're using measurement-based care, but thinking about how you pull that all together, how do you develop those skills, even during a pandemic, I think is going to be important. So I'm going to agree. Flexibility on the numbers, but we want to see that you've made thoughtful decisions on your practicum and working with your program to make sure you're still getting those foundational skills developed.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in terms of the assessment hours. So it's not just the hours, but it's also the experiences that you get. And so we're trying to be as flexible as possible, while at the same time, I do think it's a good idea for folks to try to get as much experiences as they can, given the parameters of what we're facing. So we have faced.
I would agree with those statements. At Chadron Adolescent, I mean, everyone's dealing with the pandemic, and so most everyone faces the challenges of getting in-person hours. One of our biggest points of emphasis would likely be whether or not you've sought out child-focused services. And so if you've sought those out, that would make a bigger impression on us than necessarily absolute number of hours.
And one other thing about the hours, we're not worried if you come in without a lot of experience in telehealth. We're still doing a majority of our clinical care by telehealth, and we are doing a ton of telehealth training in intern orientation to get people up to speed if they haven't done a lot of telehealth before.
Great. I'm sure it's encouraging to applicants that it sounds like sites are being flexible with both hours and then really critically thinking about the best way to offer interviews. So we appreciate hearing that. A question I got was any tips you all have for success in virtual interviews, and then also any red flags you've seen in the last year with virtual interviews.
One thing I would suggest with the virtual interviews, since you're actually not going to be in the same city as some of these places, if they're in a different time zone, make sure you know what time zone your interview is in or when it starts. But I have to say, I don't really think I saw anything that was glaring that I would say, oh, I can't believe they did that. You know, I think we're all pretty used to being in Zoom meetings like this, and, you know, we know animals are going to walk through or things going to happen. And so I think it depends on your site. For us, we love seeing like, let's see your dog, let's see, you know, but then that might not be appropriate for other places. So make sure that your setting is appropriate, that it's professional looking, that there's not a lot of distraction and stuff going on. But otherwise, I didn't really see a whole lot that was inappropriate during our Zoom interviews.
We were very anxious at Cincinnati Children's on just what it would look like, people from multiple time zones. The day extended for our faculty, and that we were trying to accommodate people from those different time zones. Honestly, it went beautiful. And one of the things that I think applicants can ask of a site if they don't offer it is we did a dry run with each applicant with our program coordinator the day before, just because I think it's anxiety provoking for faculty if they cannot connect with the applicant. And then of course, if the applicant cannot connect with the faculty during an interview. So I think that's something that applicants, if that will make you feel better, I think it's an okay request to just ensure that the links all work. Again, that was a little bit of a different time for all of us back then, but I definitely think having that dry run helped kind of appease some anxiety that applicants might have.
I don't have very much to, go ahead.
I was just going to agree. We did the same thing. We offered, and for people that wanted to, it was 2 minutes, and it would work great. And then everything went really smoothly. So I thought that was really valuable, worth the time.
I don't have very much to add to that. Just prepare like you would for a session with a client. Try to make sure you're turn off mute before you speak. The other thing in terms of learning about a site, if you're going via Zoom, I would suggest trying to get in touch with the interns, see if they can get that information, because the interns will share freely about a site, the good, the bad, and that can give you an idea of more of a flavor, whereas the program psychologists, we're going to try to put on a good face, just like you're going to try to put on a good face, but the interns will give you a pretty good idea of what's going on and what it's like.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, what is your favorite aspect of your site's training, or the one aspect that you feel offers the most growth potential to your interns?
I can start. We at the Columbus VA, one of the things, I come from an assessment background, so we do have an assessment rotation for those folks who are interested in that. In that rotation, we cover a variety of instruments, and we get a lot of different great referrals. So that's just one aspect of our site that that's particularly interesting to me personally, and I think a lot of folks benefit from.
At Cincinnati Children's, one thing I think I can speak to is we have 132 psychologists on our faculty and staff, and we're highly integrated into the medical clinics. So I think kind of getting that interdisciplinary, working with other disciplines, various disciplines, depending on the medical clinic, is definitely, I think, a strength of our program. That sometimes graduate students might not get early on in their graduate school experience for child clinical work.
I would say that I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but at Mid-Ohio Psychological Services, while we offer generalist training, I think one of the most impactful parts of what our interns get is working with system-involved individuals. So whether it's somebody who is struggling with parenting and they're working with a caseworker through children's services locally, or they're on probation for a variety of reasons. But in particular, we really pride ourselves on working with both sides of sexual offense behavior. And so individuals who are survivors of sexual abuse, as well as individuals who have committed sexual harm. And so I know that for a lot of folks, that can seem a little bit scary, or it might be a highly stigmatized form of treatment. But I know that the growth that I've seen in all of the staff that work for our agency, including our psychology interns, is so powerful, because that work is really needed and it's limited for our communities. So I would say that tends to be some of the biggest growth areas for our staff.
For us at the Cleveland VA, we also have a huge staff of 90+ psychologists. And so the wide variety of clinical experiences that we can provide, there's most interns have a hard time picking rotations because we have so many good choices. And clinical track interns are encouraged to do a rotation out of their track, and the other track interns do one non-track rotation. And so it's really cool to introduce interns to areas that they don't have a lot of prior training in and really see how they grow. And some have even developed serious interests in something that they hadn't done before internship.
So at Metro Health, our programs are growing and we've been adding faculty left and right. We've added a bariatric psychologist is joining us this summer. We have a geriatric psychologist joining us as well. We also have a contract with the Cuyahoga County jail. And so we have a psychologist there and offer a rotation in our jail setting. So I think probably the one distinct thing about working at Metro, and I think Lexi can probably speak to this because she's been a practicum student at our site a couple of years in a row, is people think they've worked with challenging and underserved patients, but until you get to the county hospital where we're really taking care of people who are underinsured and have a number of barriers to them getting care, it's really different when you come to Metro. So that's probably the biggest area of growth that I see for our trainees.
I think I'm going to give a similar VA answer. Being in a large comprehensive medical center, I always say it's kind of being like a kid at a candy shop. Like, how do you choose from all of the options? I think that we have a very strong assessment seminar and expect all of our trainees to do at least 12 comprehensive assessments. So I think that is definitely a significant area of growth, really looking at developing really strong case conceptualization skills. I think a more fun answer is, in addition to the core rotations that each intern chooses and those experiences, we work on developing what I call my bucket list and really try to get people thinking about things outside of those rotations. So often there are ways to sample and gain some experience and exposure to things that you never even considered or maybe even didn't know existed before coming to a place like this, and get your feet wet, because I think internship year is one of the most fun opportunities to really get yourself out there and try things that you hadn't considered or that you weren't sure you wanted to do, with this really wonderful safety net underneath you. So no matter what site you choose and match with, I hope that you take advantage of that opportunity. Internship year should be a really, really good growth year. And I hope that every program is going to be pushing you to stretch, not only in your areas of interest, but also trying to get you like a little outside of your lane enough to be expanding your repertoire. It's a lot harder to do once you're staff. The internship year is a perfect time for that.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I feel that one of the strengths of child and adolescent, given that we're a community mental health center, we're a one-stop shop for a lot of the underserved population within Stark County. And so in a lot of ways, it's for staff, it's the land of opportunity, and that if you have an interest, you can pursue that interest. And there's probably a niche that needs to be served in addition to your generalist training.
Great, thank you all. Our next question is, do you have any advice when writing a personal statement, either good or bad things?
I know that every site is different in this, but I know that when we are reviewing the autobiographical statements, and some of the other essays as well, that we're really looking for your personality to shine through and your authenticity to shine through. I really, really enjoy when I read them, that I feel like I get to know you a little bit. And that kind of it primes it nicely even for the interview process. But of course, you want it to be professional, and you do want to be careful about the amount of self-disclosure that you utilize. But I really do enjoy it when I can see somebody's personality shine through.
Agree. And I'm going to say this to everyone. Please, please, please make sure somebody else reads your essays before you submit them. And y'all can laugh and you can think, of course I'm going to do that, but I assure you that I have read essays that I do not believe somebody else read, because if someone else read it, they would have said, ooh, do you want to say that? Or, oh, do you see those really big grammatical errors or typos? And those things will make an impression. So I think your writing is an opportunity to make an impression. You can make a good impression, share your personality. I always say, if you can do something that makes me go, wow, or that's really cool, or that's interesting, that's probably a good essay. You can write a very reasonable professional essay that is just kind of okay, and you're competing with a lot of other people. So if you can tell me something that like makes me want to tell the other person that I'm working with reviewing applications, oh, this is really neat, this person, whatever, that's probably the best essay. So if you can write something that you can give to one of your peers to read and they go, oh, that's cool, that's probably a good essay.
Yeah, I would echo some of those sentiments. Just have someone else read it. Try to infuse your own personality into the essay. Just try to make it interesting, but also professional. So I think that's kind of would be the best advice I could give.
So a piece of advice that I have to offer from my associate training director is, if you have, we're all trying to recruit diverse and interesting trainees who have something unique to offer to our program. And if you have some invisible diversity that you offer, put it in your personal statement. Let us know. Dr. Murray happens to be a Black female, and she says, on any letter I write, I say I am a Black female. Let us know, because it may not be apparent from other ways, or other elements in your application, but we really want to recruit diverse trainees.
Great, thank you. Our next question is if any training directors have advice for PsyD applicants who might be competing with PhD applicants who may have more clinical or research experience due to the program setup or length of their program.
So I am a PsyD as a training director in our program, and I will tell you that we look more at the clinical experiences than the degree.
Yeah,
I agree.
Don't worry about it. If you're applying to a site that has a strong preference for a PsyD or a PhD, then there's nothing you can do about it anyway. And I think for many of us, that's not the most important thing.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also a PsyD, and I know that our organization does not prioritize a clinical over counseling psych or PsyD over PhD.
Yeah, same. I happen to have a PhD, and we don't necessarily differentiate between PsyDs and PhDs, and that just speaks to your personal statement, how that can be important in those essays, and your experience. We have like a kind of a ranking system that we go through, and PsyD or PhD isn't part of that system. So.
Great, thank you all for that answer. Our next question is there anything that you care more or less about in regards to seeing those experiences on an applicant's CV when you're reviewing it?
One of the things that I'll mention when I review applications is I don't want to put the puzzle pieces together of why the applicant is a good fit for for our program. So I don't think it's, I think that's where the cover letter comes through so clearly. If you can really highlight the experiences that you have that help set you up for success for the rotations that are offered for that program. And then also we all have training gaps throughout graduate school when we get ready for internship, and painting the picture for the reviewer on how that program can fill the gaps that you want to fill for your internship year. I think that speaks volumes versus what is listed exactly on the CV. CVs are getting so long. Our program jokes that we would have never gotten an internship with how competitive you guys are nowadays. And so CVs can just get very long, and that cover letter, I think, is critical. That is one of the most significant things that I'm making notes on when I review an application.
What I
Yeah,
tend,
oh, go ahead.
what I tend to look for in terms of experiences is just a goodness of fit. So for example, since we primarily serve children and adolescents, we're looking for someone who has demonstrated experience in working with children and adolescents. Both, we think it'll help you to be successful, but also, let's say you live in the Stark County area and you've only worked with adults, and then you apply to us, your cover letter might say, I love working with kids, but we'd rather you come to us because you actually have a passion for working with children and adolescents as opposed to you want to match locally.
Yeah, I was just going to say to make sure you tailor your CV to the particular site and to personalize it. You know, like for our site, for example, since we're more clinical oriented, to emphasize maybe your clinical experiences first, I think, and then maybe your research stuff later. Not that the research experiences aren't important, but just to kind of make sure you tailor that in your personal statements and other materials to the site.
I would say we really look for people who have broad experience. We find if people have sort of specialized too soon and maybe gotten too much of one kind of experience, they might struggle a little more. So we really want people to have a strong foundation in their clinical work, because the other stuff you can learn. If you have experience with some of the other stuff, that's great. But if you've only done the really specialized thing, then we worry that you're going to struggle in our primary care clinic in particular.
I just want to second that, Britt, that you and I have talked offline about the importance of very strong child clinical skills, and that pediatric chronic health stuff can come on internship. So I just really want to emphasize, I know it's exciting to jump into pediatric institutions and get those specialized experiences, but I really look for a strong child clinical psychologist training.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, which part or parts of the application factor in the most when deciding who you will be inviting for an interview?
I would say at Dayton, we're looking at the essays and the cover letter, really, all of them. It's really important. Spend time on those essays. For my site, I wouldn't expect or care for you to specialize your CV. I figure your CV is your CV, but to what people are saying in the cover letter, say what's relevant, say why you think you're good for our site, but also what you want to learn. I think that shows good self-awareness. We're looking for goodness of fit. We're looking for people that are going to be excited to work with us, and that we're going to be excited to work with you. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, and you don't ever have to have had all of the experiences that you're going to get on internship. Like, if you want to be in my PTSD rotation, that's great. It doesn't mean you have to have done specialized PTSD work before you get to us. If you did, that's fine. That's great. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but that is not necessary. I'd rather you have strong CBT skills and not have done the PTSD work than, I don't know, I guess I'm looking for people that are going to be good to train. I think we all are. So let's get to for answer.
I was gonna say, we have sort of our baseline that we're looking for, you know, if there are certain things, you know, around hours or number of assessments you may have that we kind of look for. So if you don't meet that minimum, then you may not go kind of to the more intensive phase where we're then looking to see who we want to interview. But again, it all comes down to having that variety of experiences and being a good fit for our program and wanting to learn what we have to offer.
Yeah, I would agree. Wanting to learn what we have to offer. I've heard that a couple different times, and I know Mid-Ohio, we really see that as important. And I think that shines through the most in your cover letter. So I would say that cover letter and essays tend to carry a little bit more weight overall. We're really looking for an alignment between what the intern is looking to get from their experience versus what we have to offer. Just making sure that we have to offer what that person is really looking for overall. And I agree with what Kristen was saying, that you don't necessarily have to have all of the experiences prior to coming to internship of what we do and what we provide the community. Then you wouldn't need internship for that. You know what I mean? You would have already had those experiences. So we definitely, if you haven't had all of the experiences we have to provide, we don't put a lot of emphasis in that. We actually really are looking for folks who have had a lot of generalist experience overall and just strong clinical skills.
Yeah, the Columbus VA, we do have like some minimum standards that we look for, but certainly the cover letters and the essays really help your personality to sort of shine through and help us to really understand if you fit with our program.
At the Cleveland VA, we do look at many of the core elements of the application equally. One thing that I have seen that we do really look for and value is diversity, and not just being a member of a diverse group, but also having diverse experiences. Like maybe you have expertise in a particular diversity area. I've seen that really help people.
One of the things that I tend to emphasize are your letters of recommendation, because these are the people who know you over the course of the year, over the course of your training. A really strong letter of recommendation to me tends to carry a lot of weight.
I'm going to add a 2021 comment too, because when I think about the applications and what we're going to be looking at, there definitely are going to be some opportunities, especially in the cover letter. I'm going to come back to that, to speak to what you were and weren't able to do as a result of the pandemic. And I think communicating with us, explaining what you were able to do, explaining what you weren't able to do, and what you plan to do to fill in any gaps that may have been created by this pandemic, again, reflects self-awareness, investment, and interest in making sure you take care of any places that you've missed out on something. And I think you'll find that there are going to be a tremendous amount of grace if you're someone who didn't get to maximize all of your experiences in the last 2 years. We know it's been a hot mess, and nobody is looking to punish or penalize our potentially really good intern matches over that. So if you're someone heading into this really stressed by that, you know, shake it off a little bit and then just think about, well, why am I stressed? Well, I'm stressed because I didn't get to do these things that I was supposed to be able to do. Well, tell us about that. Right. And then tell us what you're wanting to get now, since you didn't get to do that then. And I think it'll be okay.
So building off of what Dr. Redzinko was just saying, is internship year is hard. And we know that when people have resilience and flexibility and can manage things, that they tend to do pretty well on internship training. So with that experience, if you're able to talk about your resilience and your grit and how you were able to still get what you needed, or you know, problem solve, that really will shine through in your letter.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, do you have any advice when it comes time for ranking sites?
it was already said earlier today, but I couldn't reiterate enough. Just focus on what you think is the strongest alignment that you have with the experiences you want. It needs to be your preference and list them in the order of your preference, regardless of how you feel your interview process went. You're going to be spending your next year somewhere.
I totally agree. And I would also encourage you to, if there's a site that you love, but it's maybe not as fancy as a different site that you interviewed at, pick the one that you love.
Yeah, I agree.
Great, pretty quick and easy question. I have another one that is about kind of phase 2, and I know people don't want to think about that, but this is a great opportunity to ask a question if that arises for anyone. So what suggestions or advice do you have for students who don't match in phase 1 and go on to phase 2?
So I can actually speak a little bit to that, because we've every year except for this year, we've gone into phase 2. And I can tell you that probably the reason that somebody gets into phase 2 is because they were too geographically limited in their application and ranking. That they might have been a strong candidate and ranked high, pretty highly somewhere else, but they just didn't get that far down on the list during the match. And so we've actually gotten some of our best candidates in phase 2. So, if you want to avoid that, make sure you have a balance of sites that you have, the ones that you want to go to where you can be competitive, but you also don't want to pick ones that you're not a good fit for just as a safety net, because they'll know you're not a good fit and they might not even rank you either. So really, if you can be as broad as you can, and if you can be geographically flexible, that will help.
Nothing really unique to add, just to reiterate based on what she was just saying, that we've gotten some of our best candidates through phase 2. We don't go into phase 2 every year, but we did this last year. And we know that same thing as she was saying, I think a majority of people end up geographically constricting themselves and or like niching themselves or specializing themselves maybe too early into maybe a highly competitive market like neuropsych or forensic psych or something like that, or hospital settings. And maybe not as open to other possibilities that could also meet their training needs. And so phase 2, if we go into phase 2, I think nothing of that. I always think that we run into really, really great candidates through that.
I would agree with that too. We've had a couple times where we've gone into phase 2 and we found some of our best interns have come from that phase. So I don't think should be any big concern. And like others have said, a lot of times if you over specialize or limit yourself geographically, I think we found that can be a reason sometimes people go into phase 2. But also it could just be luck of the draw as well. Like I said, some really great candidates have gone into phase 2 that we've been able to get. So.
Great, thank you all for that encouraging answer. So this is our last question. And the question is, how early would you recommend students start planning for internship? And are there any specific experiences or opportunities you would recommend students pursue at the beginning of their training that would help them stand out during the application and interview process?
Make sure you get assessment and good case conceptualization experience. Please, we see people, again, I think you've heard this, but don't try to do the fancy stuff. Get the foundations, get the core. If you don't have the core, you will struggle on internship. I promise. It will be hard. Foundational skills all day long.
I think also starting those essays and cover letters early in summertime, late summer, so you can get multiple eyes. I think people get eager to start looking at the sites and delving in that way. But I think iterations of those essays and cover letters are critical. Multiple eyes, multiple components of feedback would be, I think, of benefit.
Great, thank you all. And now we're going to pass it back over to Stacy to wrap up the morning portion of this workshop.
Hello. Okay, that was such great information. It's funny how it hits differently this year when I'm going to be headed into that than even last year. So thank you all very much for all of that very good information.